can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Peter of NAV43.com. And Peter, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out, other podcasts. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, a fan favorite in this is Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey I had on. He has the Second Bite podcast. He basically helps take agencies, pairs them with private equity, helps sell agencies. And Second Bite, he called it that because sometimes he finds the agencies make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So when they sell to private equity and private equity sells, they actually make more rolling equity into the private equity fund than they did on the first sale. So he talks about valuation, the agency space. That was an interesting one. Also, Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech was another interesting one. He's had an agency since 1995. So he talks about just over decades. What is the internet landscape? We were talking before we hit record, Peter, about AI, right? He was talking about what did the internet landscape look like in 95 and then ongoing, and the business landscape and the agency landscape. So a lot changed throughout the years. So that was another interesting one. So you can check out more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast, or an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So kind of, Peter, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the host so they can develop amazing relationships, create amazing content, and most importantly, run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships, and I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Peter Palarchio, and he's the co-founder of NAV43. Actually, funny enough, I have had Ben, his co-founder, on the podcast, so you can check that episode out. We'll hear both sides of the story here. But NAV43 is a digital agency that's known for its innovative online growth strategies. Peter actually launched his entrepreneurial career at 25 in the event marketing space. Since he's overseen digital growth on hundreds of projects ranging from startups to enterprises. And during his agency career, he's led major accounts, including ones with Marriott, Hyatt, Fairmont, and many, many more. Peter, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So just start off for a second and tell us about NAV43 and what you do.
Yeah, NAV43 is a digital marketing agency focusing in three main pillars. We focus on SEO, paid media, and CRO. And we focus in primarily two areas of e-commerce and lead generation, so B2B or B2C lead generation. And we focus on these three main pillars because we feel that they work together incredibly well for lowering your overall cost per acquisition. Obviously, after the fact, there's a lot of things that go on with the funnel to keep your customers, but we're really focusing on getting you that net new business.
Some interesting things that we'll talk about, Peter, is how you started the company, you went off and did something else, and then you came back to the company. That was super fascinating. So we'll talk a little bit about that dynamic. Also, how strategy has protected you guys. We'll talk about that. And sales stuff. I know you geek out on sales stuff. So we'll talk about that, and then maybe some AI sprinkled in there. So, but start off, I'm fascinated by this, Peter. So you started the company, you went off, and then you came back.
That's right. So Not common, I'm sure. Maybe the shiny object syndrome is with entrepreneurs of always wanting to do a million different things that you think you might be good at or that might keep your interest. But yeah, I think usually the story is find it, grow it, sell it, or maybe hire someone to run it or something along those lines. But NAV43, I think in its original form it's over 10 years old now. NAV43 itself was founded in 2016, but Ben and I were university roommates. So it's kind of that story where we stayed in touch and both navigated our way into digital. We found this new landscape. It was exciting. We were both analytic junkies, I think, off the bat. And we looked at ourselves and said, we can do this. Let's start a business. So in 2013, we did that. I would say if we were to label it today, it was more freelancing, side hustle, doing some other things. And I had already had some experience in the event marketing space. So that was the first area that I kind of got my business chops and really started seeing how when I was driving ticket sales to events, and these were fairly large scale events, often 5,000 people plus, digital became more and more important.
What type of events were they? More like trade shows or conferences? What type of events were you?
Yeah, so pretty big in nightlife actually, and concerts and festivals. So that's kind of what I was doing. I was 25, so kind of work matching with what I wanted to do in my free time was also really good, and found a way to kind of make some money off of it and really grew. And that's a whole story kind of about how sponsorship plays in. It's really a huge factor for offsetting costs. Learned how to manage, my own P&Ls, learned how to manage inventory, staffing, but marketing is such a huge component of throwing events. And there was this interesting transition around that time as well, around maybe 2010 and into the years after, was tickets themselves moved. There used to be physical tickets, and it moved to the digitization of tickets. And now, for the first time, I learned what a real funnel was. I could see points of conversion and how people got there and how to spend ad dollars effectively. And being, a very small startup, having to kind of learn this on my own as well, because it was my dollars. Ben at the time was also got into this, I think, brand side originally, and then moved to a large agency and was getting large agency experience. And, you can kind of see sometimes as a younger individual what agencies might be charging without fully understanding all the costs associated with it and think I can do this. So we joined forces and very quickly got clients where Ben was the paid media expert. And we were predominantly doing PPC at the time. Like we both had taught ourselves kind of ads. I had learned a lot about social advertising. This was the dawn of Facebook ads. And Ben was getting really, really good at PPC. So we started that in 2013.
It's almost like having a magic trick. You know what I mean? Like PPC, like I could make customers show up out of nowhere. So
and it was cheaper back then. The ads were cheaper. I think everyone who's been in the space for a long time knows it was a lot cheaper and it was easier to show good acquisition costs. So again, this is a 10-year journey. So I'm going to try to fast track this. But since you've had Ben on, there's a funny story in this.
I don't think he told any of this. We didn't talk about this stuff. Yeah.
There's a funny story in this because this is NAV43 again, 2016. So Ben has his job and I'm still kind of working in event marketing and, making some money there, and we're getting some clients. And I have to give kudos to this guy because I said, Ben, if we need this thing to work, you really gotta quit your job, man. And he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to quit my job. He's like, you're coming aboard too. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm coming aboard. And there had been some opportunities in the event marketing space that really blossomed. And I'm like, Ben, I'm not coming aboard. So
like, I know you just quit your job. But,
and I think he cashed in some savings.
To you. Then you got punched in the face and no.
Still friends. He was enjoying his life, right? And but I did come back. I came back. So
he quit his job. Did he stay at that point? Did he just go full time with NAV43, or
he
did
he?
He
did.
Okay, so he did. He just kept doing it.
He kept doing it, and it was enough to sustain him. Right? Again, like I said.
And you weren't? Were you working at? Were you involved at all at that point?
I was in the business dev side of referrals. And then, it was, like I said, if I were to label it, we were incorporated and we had that stuff, but we were still young. And like I said, if I were to label it today, it was a little more freelancing, contractors, not having to deal with full-time employees. So this is the 2013 to 2016 side. But it kind of kept growing in a sense. And he kind of looked at me and he said, man, I gotta like take on some of these clients like on my own. I want to oversee SEO, like these things, like starts taking revenue outside of, our incorporation at the time. Obviously, okay, go do what you got to do. I didn't have any eyes for kind of scaling that at the time. But event marketing for me had turned into branding, had turned into a niche in hospitality and tourism, which is how I got some of the clients you kind of mentioned initially. That working in event marketing led me to major sponsors, a lot of alcohol companies, a lot of things, and was really had my eyes on more of a full service agency. And that opportunity came around with some investors that wanted to scale up quite largely. And in 2016, that's when I gave Ben a call and I said, look, I'm going to do this deal. It's mainly going to be branding, design, some of the things that, I've been focusing on, but I would love to have a digital arm. Do you want to come aboard? And that's kind of how NAV43 formed in more of its current state. And then, we kind of rolled on it. We did have some funding. So we were able to grow quickly, I think, off of that side. But again, it was a part of a bigger agency. And I wasn't, again, working as closely. And then did that, for till around 2020-ish. So you're doing 4.5 years, and we racked up some really good clients. But again, Ben heading up more of our digital arm, me doing client management, overall operations, branding. We did, digital design, websites, UX. We were doing a lot of full service things. Came to a point after those 4 years, I was feeling a lot of agency burnout. There were some things from a P&L perspective that weren't making sense of being part of a larger agency. And we decided to shotgun our way out. We had a buy sell with the larger agency. And I know I fast forwarded 4 years here, but Ben and I bought ourselves out.
Can you just, for people who don't know what that is, talk about the shotgun? And that's something you put in place in the very beginning of this deal. So if I go back for a second, Peter, in this, what was the funding for NAV43, or was there a separate entity that had the funding and then you just brought kind of Ben into the digital arm?
Yeah, so I'll have to give myself a little bit of kudos. Ben and that other organization that he kind of started outside of our freelance kind of agreement did get acquired. So we did write Ben a check at the time and he came on board, right? So, it paid off a little bit for him. When this was happening, because there was an acquisition of that entity by my newly formed entity as well, there is obviously a shareholder agreement. So there was a purchase of capital structuring for anyone new to entrepreneurship. I think it's incredibly important for you to understand. I think if you're analyzing bigger companies, also very important to understand, but you're going to issue a certain amount of shares out to, shareholders, and they're going to have a price and you're going to have to buy them and you might sell them one day. So it's certainly something to understand, but also understand exit clauses. I would say it's very important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, whether it's you're doing it with your best friend or stranger, go into things with the absolute best intentions. At one point, you're likely going to leave that business. I don't think many entrepreneurs start their business at 25 and retire in that business at 65. So although you're going with it with the best intentions and you overlook what this exit deal might be, especially if you're younger, because you're incredibly positive, everything's going to work out, you guys are going to take over the world, you're likely going to revisit that again. And, maybe it sits on a drawer somewhere, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's something that you have to understand because it's a real world scenario. So I'd advise you to get, a pretty good corporate lawyer who understands the sides of your business and maybe the industry to write up something. So ours at the time had the way it was tied to fair market value to a point, which can be difficult to assess, but that protects both sides, I think, on a shotgun. So shotgun is you basically send an offer to a certain percentage of the shareholders to buy their shares. with usually a time limit attached. So when you're sending over that offer, you send over this shot, it can be called a buy sell shotgun. You're sending over, an offer to buy their shares out that in our situation was tied to a certain percentage of fair market value, and you have a time to respond. But at the end of the day, once you send that, you're no longer partners. So you've set a price and a valuation on your shares, and I'm either buying yours or you're buying mine. But it's a very serious letter to send that says we're not partners at the end of this. I would advise most people, if it's under good terms, talk to each other first. You can save yourself a lot of money in legal fees and likely agree to it. But if you're not under good terms, you can do it. And then it can be a fairly interesting ride in emotions waiting to hear back from their lawyers.
And it somewhat forces people to be fair, because the price that you offer to buy them, they can turn around and
that's
do
the price.
reverse to you, right? So like
That's
you can't be like, well, I'm going to buy you for $1. Well, then if they choose no, then I get to buy you for $1. So it forces you to really think through what would be fair for both parties, even in the toughest of circumstances, I imagine.
That's right. So it certainly protects both parties, because let's say if it's under bad circumstances and maybe you want to lowball them as much as possible, you might lose your half, right? So you do have to send an offer, like I said, whether it's tied to fair market or whatever. Remember, the shotgun can be turned around on you and you just valued your shares. So they have the choice to accept it and you purchase their shares, or they turn it around and they say, okay, I am purchasing yours. And I think, that's the comment. At the end of the day, you're not going to be partners after that clause is executed.
So in this situation, Peter, you and Ben initiated the shotgun to the other
correct
members who also owned this company.
That's right.
Got it.
So, but it was only, so NAV43, again, if we're going to capital structuring, was still incorporated separately. So even though it was part of a bigger agency, the capital structuring had always kept it separate. So that's what made that.
And so NAV43 will pretend for this conversation, let's say NAV43 really owned the shares for you and Ben. So NAV43 kind of separated off once you did that shotgun.
Yeah.
I got you.
And then again, so whatever time frame that is.
So really quickly on that, I'm interested in, so when you did this, do you then offer to buy or sell? Like, is your initial communication like, we want to sell? Or, because they could have turned around either way and said no. So what was your initial conversation like of how you wanted, like, we want out, like you can buy us? Or did you say, we'll buy you?
We wanted to buy for sure. But we knew, again, you're sitting there. This wasn't, because it was the best relationship going on at the time with the other partners. So it was a little stressful in a sense that you might lose everything you've done. And I think in that sense, probably what protected us was the fact that digital agencies require a lot of technical expertise. And if you aren't the technical person, you're going to have to find a way to replace those skills quite quickly that, especially Ben at that point had brought to the table. So I think that probably protected us. Again, you have to figure out a number that, is fair, because you're writing the check. You have to have the money. You have to close on the deal. But if you're offering $1, the guy's probably going to give you, he's going to match you. So you do have to be careful. And
so you said, we want to buy this thing.
Yeah.
And they turn around and basically said, no, but we'll buy you for that price.
No. So we said, we want to buy out your shares, and they said yes. So we were able to buy ourselves out.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you've kind of are back to NAV43 in its own entity.
And we were, and that, interesting enough. So that would have been around February 20th, 2020. And we just wrote a check to buy ourselves out. And a month later, COVID happens and half our clients pause. So that was interesting. At the time though, even when we were doing this transaction, I had kind of talked to Ben that I was experiencing agency burnout. And I think if a lot of people know what that is, it can be exhausting trying to operate the multiple parts of an agency. And I said, I'm stepping back. I want to do some other things. So I did. So I have to give kudos to Ben that, those initial days of COVID, I was acting more of an advisor and navigating us through everything and how things might happen. The upside of that and the timing was we had actually released ourselves from duties from our office. So we actually hadn't signed a new lease. So we didn't have the challenges of a lease at the time. We have since gotten an office. And then although half of our clients, let's say, paused, afterwards, the upside of that timing was a lot of people needed an e-commerce and digital lead gen strat. So, but Ben was running shit. I went and started working on a few other things for sure. So I have to give kudos to Ben again, taking it over.
So how did you start that conversation? Because it's a tough conversation. I know in my mind, it seems like a tough conversation to have that, like, hey, I need to step away and do something else. Because again, you've gone through a lot over, up to that point, at least 7 years or something like that. Yeah. How did you have that conversation?
I think in two ways. One, it's likely not possible if you're not friends already. And I think that can make challenges to a partnership if you're already friends. But I think sometimes it gets you through tougher times because you never actually get too mad at each other or anything along those lines. And you kind of still want what's best for a friend. And they're telling you you're stressed out. So I think that helps, that you feel you can communicate quite openly with a guy you've known for a while. And then I think part two is there's often differences between shareholders, employees, and operators and comp package. So it wasn't like I said, I'm going to take a salary or anything along those lines. It was stepping back to being a shareholder and board member. Yeah. Where Ben was acting as the CEO.
Like, I'm going to go leave. I'm still going to take half the salary of this company. And so there's not the same, I guess, there wouldn't be like resentment because it's not like you're taking something out of the company. You're not doing anything. Because I mean, technically, probably if someone's not on good terms and they own half the company, they could, I guess, argue for that in some fashion, right?
Again, going back to shareholder agreements and how you agree on employees and what's a board decision or reserved shareholder matters very well could be. Again, I think being friends in that situation probably got us a little bit through and really helped out for sure. But again, understanding what's in those shareholder agreements can be really important because if some person has decision-making power on employment, well, that your partner could fire you from the company and you're still a sharedholder. And at the end of the day, if Ben didn't like it, we still, I think, have a buy sell in ours. So he still has that opportunity if at any point he didn't want someone around. And I still say it's not like I was absentee in a sense. I would still be part of financial discussions, monthly meetings, acting as an advisor, helping where I can, and still referring business.
Are you thinking at that point, Peter, I am going to come back at some point?
Never.
Or no, you're like,
for a second.
I'm done.
Not for one second. No, I was quite content and happy with Ben running the agency. He was a CEO. He got through the challenges of early 2020, turned it around, was profitable and handing out dividend checks. Why would I ever go back at that time? Yeah.
So what did you go off and do?
Consulting. Went into the consulting world and got more into what was initial passion of mine, which was finance, and started working on a lot of consulting in publicly traded companies and working with them and discovering investor relations and how my skill set of marketing could help, publicly traded companies who often lack a lot of internal resources for marketing, how that can help to get their story out a little bit more.
So then what brought you back?
Consulting. It was lucrative for sure, but I don't know how many consultants might be listening to this. People don't have to listen to you. Like, they don't have to implement your strategy. And as a consultant, you're often not compensated for overall implementation. You put together really great decks, really great stories, really great strategies. But there was a couple things that I couldn't get past. I think with maybe my past entrepreneurial experience was one, not being the ultimate decision maker and becomes a very tough pill to swallow when you're very much used to things just happening when you say they happen. And then realizing the importance of potentially, let's say, even being a signing authority, especially as you're bringing other people from your network to clients and they do work and they need to be compensated for work or on time or those things. It can be very challenging when you realize you're not the one signing the checks. So consulting was a really interesting time. Um, it's strange. They're probably the last person, like you'll never get fired. They love talking to you. They love, your ideas. They are interested in your insights, in your research and all of these things. But it became rather unfulfilling in a sense that you're not seeing your ideas come to life and things aren't happening as fast as you're used to as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So there's a frustration that this great plan is not getting executed on.
That's exactly it. And I think it became, I think a little bit unsatisfying in a sense because you're attached to your projects as a consultant. You want to see these go through. You're getting FaceTime with the executive team. You're doing all these things, but you don't necessarily control maybe if you're their top priority or how, your ideas stack up. So it almost felt like you had to sell through things constantly just for good work to happen. And it became, a little bit tiresome for sure.
So at what point do you then go back? And how does that conversation go?
I said, Ben, we should go to cottage country this weekend. And we went, and there's a great place if anyone's around Toronto called Muskoka. We went on our Canada Day weekend, very close to the American listeners' Independence Day, 3 days before. And I just we were just talking, and I just kind of said, learned a lot in the consulting world, especially on the B2B lead gen side of things. I was working with a lot of B2B companies also. And I felt, I felt like, why not apply all these things I've learned to our company and use my time to scale a company that I own rather than consulting on these companies. So the agency burnout was gone. I won't say consulting ever burned me out. I would say, I don't know if it frustrated me out the door of that world. And then basically said, okay, I want to come back in a full-time capacity, which really would have been the first time that I had. And the first time that I said, hey, since we were in that little side hustle, say, hey, let's put our heads down and let's do this together and see what we can do and challenge ourselves to scale up the right way and generate a proper inbound lead program and bring in the right clients and processes and everything we think we know how to do to scale up.
And what was his reaction?
Sounds great. I think he liked it, like the fact that, he could have, again, another executive there day in, day out. I didn't say I was going to get involved as much with ops or delivery. I said, I want to work on overall corporate strategy, and business growth and business dev and branding and content and some of those things.
Talk about, you come on with this from a sales perspective, I know. Talk about B2B sales and what some of the lessons and what you've learned there.
Yeah, I thought I was fantastic at B2B sales until I started, I think, maybe going through what some of our clients go through on all these great inbound leads we generate. So one of the first things, we thought of is, well, we generate inbound leads for our clients all the time. Let's apply some of that skill set to us. So I would say it started firing quite quickly. And we have, I think, what a lot of B2B clients face, a large ticket item and consultative selling. There needs to be some education and there needs to be, some buy-in you're not buying a product, you're buying this imaginary service that is really going to help your business. So I think that is very different on an inbound form fill of someone who may have seen an ad, who may have heard you on a podcast, who may have read an article on your blog because you're ranking for SEO or local SEO or whatever those top of funnel tactics we're using, versus a referral, which is we grew a lot through referrals and agency partnerships. So agency partnerships, whether it was white labeling or not, that was our big web dev agency with an enterprise client saying, these guys are really good at site migrations, use them. Or they're really good at technical audits, we don't do that, you need to use them. So that business was coming in. And then someone saying, Pete and Ben are the best at this. Don't question them, just go with that. So these people have already moved down the funnel quite a bit, right? Us not realizing at the time, it's very easy with hindsight to say, I was selling bottom funnel leads anyways. So obviously my conversion rate was good. It's because I wasn't moving down the first couple steps. So my whole life, I thought, maybe I'm a 70% close guy. Like I think me and Ben would laugh if we look at our forecast from a couple summers ago of what we thought our conversion rate was going to be. So we lay down some strategy and go into Q1, and I generate 52 new inbound leads in 90 days, which was great. If you look at the ticket size of an agency, that is a lot of growth that you could have right there. I closed one of them, so that was 1.8%, I believe. After those 90 days, I said something's wrong, and maybe generating inbound leads is the thing I'm going to pause on and learn about this whole sales thing. Maybe a lot of entrepreneurs out there in the same challenge. Sales is as big of a skill as marketing. It's as big of a skill as operations, finance, anything you do. And I was completely unaware of this. So I think that was really interesting in a sense of I need to learn what this process is, and especially on a longer sales cycle. So, a good close for us, I think, would be 3.5, 4 weeks. I have people on my board right now that are 8 months, depending on the size of the deal and the approvals required and who the decision maker and when budgets get released. So it's very important, I think, to understand all of those tactics. And that was the grind I think I didn't expect of how much I had to dedicate myself to learn selling inbound leads.
So Peter, talk about some of the things you did to course correct, right?
Okay. Let's go. How do you course correct?
Don't leave me hanging with the 1 out of 52.
Yeah. So one, acknowledge you have a problem in the skill that you probably need to improve on. Yeah, no, I just passed it back to Ben, actually. I said, this is another thing I don't want to deal with, figure this out. No, I took it quite seriously. I think one thing first was acknowledging there was a problem. And I think the first thing I did was, who am I even selling to? Who am I selling to? Who's buying? What are their core desires? All of these things that we know as marketers, and really developing my own personas. So we went back on all the years of history of every client we ever had. And we said, okay, who are our good clients, right? Who are the ones that stuck around? Who are the ones that saw the greatest results? And we learned for our free services, and not necessarily being a true full service digital marketing agency, we worked best under digital marketers who needed specialists, who needed expertise. That's where we really fit in. So we created a persona kind of around that and understood, selling to them is completely different than selling to a business owner, and how you handle those people. So we created tiers. So our primary tier was selling to digital marketers or digital savvy marketers, right? That really understood the language we were talking. So there was less education, right? But a lot of interest, and their core desires were a lot different, but they stuck around with us the longest and we could execute the best for them. Next, obviously the business owners themselves, you don't want to always throw away business. So we kind of created some ideas about the type of business owners we want when we're like selling directly to founders, and there's some qualifications there. And then our third tier, we still like our agency partners. We still will work with you, whether it's a branding agency that needs SEO, or web developers, or even larger digital agencies that need specialization. So that was kind of first step of establishing that, and then building a bit more strategic communication and realizing you sell to all three differently. There's a different sales process for all three. Now, that was the first realization, because now we're like, well, let's work hard on the ones we want, number one, and position ourselves that way. But that still didn't help me, interact. And I was very fortunate that joined a really great digital entrepreneurship group. And I think it's called Rhodium Network. I don't know if any of your listeners are part of it.
Right?
Chris Yates.
Yeah, I was just emailing with him the other day. Yep, he's great.
He's set up. I almost want to keep it a secret. He's created one of the best networks for digital entrepreneurs in the world right now, and it'll stay that way because of Chris. He interviews everyone, and he's done some really amazing things with.
He really vets the group.
Really vets the group, and it's amazing the group of people he put together. We meet in person twice a year. But then we are also on a Slack group, and then you're in subgroups within it. And I'm in a B2B group, but there's content publishers, there's e-commerce people, so all incredibly intelligent people, and large and small people with massive exits, people just crossing a 7-figure mark, all of these things. And he can put all these people together, and he has a really unique system of gives and asks. So I was going to my first retreat with them in Costa Rica, and my asks were all about sales because I knew I had a problem. So I underwent probably 4 sessions with some real top agency salespeople, and they were able to identify very quickly my mistakes from experience, where they kind of said, "Hey, these are the things you're doing wrong." And I will say this: one of the biggest things you're probably doing wrong is being a know-it-all in your first call. No one likes that. And you're such a subject matter expert. I've seen this exact e-commerce problem before, right? But it's very unique to your inbound lead, right? You don't know them. You cannot jump to solving their problem on the first call. So that was probably one of my bigger problems, is that is creating a different sales process. And that first discovery call is just that. You are asking questions. Do not attempt to solve their problem on the first call. So people have really helped me with that. Qualifying leads, for the people that are doing a little bit better is also just as important. Knowing who as I said, all those 3 tiers of who my customer is, I had to realize who my customer isn't. And, feel free to start qualifying them quickly if you're generating inbound leads. You have to have some immediate qualifiers because some things just won't work out. So that was incredibly important, of getting that kind of sales coaching from people who do what I do. And then another thing that I'd really flagged was I was a boardroom guy before. I'd met people, I'd taken them out to dinners, I'd done sales process like that. By default, post 2020, every sales call has turned virtual. That is, people are doing inquiries, they're not coming to meet you. I'm not flying to New York. These are virtual sales calls. And there are some important tactics, I think, to do when you're selling virtually as well. It's a different environment. So I was fortunate enough to have a psychologist in my network who did an evaluation of all the trust factors of my virtual selling and gave me a bunch of great notes on the mistakes I was making and how important those first few minutes are. So that was also really interesting. And I think,
what were some of the things they said about selling virtually, and then, how you can improve those trust factors?
So just your overall setup. I think if you can improve your setup with lighting, eye level, all of those things are just those immediate trust factors that people are taking in. Eye contact is an incredibly strange one, because looking at the screen actually isn't giving your client eye contact. You actually have to look into there to actually give someone eye contact. So that one is something you kind of would have never set up. How important, the sensitivity, this one might be obvious, to being on time in a virtual meeting is completely different than if someone rolled into your boardroom 2 minutes late. Show up 5 minutes early, right? And then truly let the person know you're listening by asking the right questions. And then the importance of your second, again, not jumping to conclusion. Don't assume you know anything about these people. Their problems are very unique to them, even though you've probably faced it 200 times before. So that was, again, was something that was reiterated in, this evaluation. And then I would say a book that I read was incredibly important, recommended by someone in my entrepreneurship group, Spin Selling. I think maybe a lot of people have heard about this one. If you're doing consultative selling, adopting some spin into your process will really help you out for sure. Understanding that these large ticket items take time. So going from discovery to offer presentation to negotiation to nurturing. And then now, especially doing what we do, all those little bits in between, and really leveraging CRM tactics for nurturing and content education. I think understanding who the decision maker is off the get-go, repeating things back to your prospect after your discovery session, and immediately you will invoke some trust, right? Of saying, hey, remember these things we covered? Boom, they knew you were listening. You've repeated these things. These are a lot of things that I think are really important. Another one, I would say, we do not really go too far now without pitching decision makers or like getting some type of contact with them. It's probably a qualifier of ours, because I don't want to rely on what I'll call the influencer to the sale to then sell me internally. Because I think there's studies, they will lose up to 50% of the things they said. And then objection handling and pre-call sales objectives, really important. If you I think it's like, if you look at sports or anything, the amount you practice, right, really gets you good at something. If you're not practicing before your pitch of what the objections are going to be, which you've already know, like you've done this a million times, you can really figure it out. And how to handle objections while you're going in is incredibly important. If you're not doing that, I think you're hurting your own rate by 50%, because they're going to love everything you say. They're going to agree that they need to make this change. Everything you've put is great. You have a bunch of great clients. Why wouldn't they want to trust you, right? Well, ask them. If you had a pre-call sales objective of saying, I'm closing this deal, like we've done nurturing, we've done everything, like what's happening? My goal is to close that deal. And it didn't close. You can't leave without understanding why. You can't say, oh, well, yeah, that sounds good, we'll follow up. No, like those follow-ups are going to get more spread out. It's going to take up time. You can ask people, why aren't you moving forward? And they're not offended by any means, and they generally tell you. And then be prepared to, understand why and how you can truly help them. So that was a very long process, and I hope some of these tips help. There's some other things along the way, but that was probably the biggest game changer in maybe my career. That's really helped me out quite a bit, because I'm still the same person. I still believe we do really great work. I always have. Finding ways to effectively communicate that and close a deal is very important.
Peter, that was super valuable. I'm gonna have to re-listen to that, but just a quick sum up. Being a know-it-all in the first call is a mistake, and then you're really asking questions. Qualify leads. I want to dig a little bit more into that one, because you said you want to pitch decision makers. So my question on that front, which I'll get into in a second, is more like, without offending the person, saying, okay, like I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to the higher ups. I'm curious how you navigate that, but 3, selling virtually, you talked about some of the trust factors, objection handling, why aren't you moving forward, and some of those things people can do. On the qualifying leads part, how do you navigate that piece to say, hey, like, you're really not the person I need to be talking to, saying it in a nice way, and actually having it be effective? Because they may push back. Say, like, listen, the CEO's, I'm sure you've heard all these objections, right?
Yeah.
The CEO's busy. They put me in charge of this. How are you navigating?
Okay, so first, be confident that you've won over this influencer, that they want to work with you. Because otherwise, I think that's important. Once you realize that the influencer is kind of giving you their okay, and this is actually a new stage in my deal board. I actually have influencer buy-in and then decision maker buy-in. I've added this to that. I've migrated to HubSpot. Also, can say a lot of good things about them. I think for scale up brands, it's a very good CRM, and they're really doing some really great things. So that's new on my board. Is once you realize you have that influencer buy-in, I have a completely honest conversation with them about it. That I tell them exactly that. I'm like, do you think it's best for us moving forward that I'm relying on you to sell my business? And they look at you and they're like, no, that sounds terrible. Like, why would I want to do that? I don't want to be your sales guy. And they'll find a way to make the time. And I have not, if I've gotten the influencer buy-in since we've taken that approach, I've not actually had that objection that I can't get in front of the decision maker, because they believe in you and they're like, yeah, you're right. I don't want to do your sales pitch. So, and then, because otherwise they just relay the objection, the decision maker relayed the objection down to the influencer, and, oh, it's not the right time. It's not the influencer at the company isn't trained in my objection handling. They can't rhyme off the 10 case studies that I can do, or how I can change on the spot. If it's a budgetary decision, I have the flexibility on addressing budget. Mr. Decision Maker, well, what if we only charge you 50% month one to show you what we can do? Or, that flexibility to kind of get a deal done. So it just wasn't worth going forward at that point. It was, you just didn't hear it. And I think we all maybe know that in terms of procurement, right, and agencies, sometimes it's, all right, I'm the decision maker. I'm going to hand this down to someone lower than me to go find 3 presentations, and I'm going to shop on price, and that's not helping me either.
Peter, first of all, I have one last question for you. This has been a masterclass, at least for me, in B2B selling. Okay. So I appreciate you sharing this stuff. I'm curious your recommended tech stack. You mentioned HubSpot. So some of your favorites. And I do want to point one thing out. One thing what you said that stuck out, which is don't try and solve their problem. There's one of my favorite videos. I don't know if you've seen it. It's not about the nail. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to put it in the chat here. It's hilarious, but to me, anyways. So anyone's listening, just Google "It's Not About the Nail" YouTube video and watch it. It's literally just the funniest thing about not solving someone's problem. Like
that's
it's funny.
You don't know them. It's not nice. I'm gonna have to add just one more person that really helped me. Sorry, my wife. If she decides to listen to this, I absolutely have to put her in this. My wife has been in sales her whole career and has completely been sales trained and has helped me with my objection handling and probing and all that great stuff. And someone who I've bounced a ton of ideas off at home. Being an entrepreneur who thinks you're automatically good at everything and not realizing the skill set they had was, a tough pill to swallow. But my wife been amazing in her career and was a huge help too.
Well, Peter, promise me you'll watch "It's Not About the Nail" with your wife at the same time, and then let me know what you think.
Okay.
Last question: tech stack. Some favorite tech tools.
So I've drank the HubSpot Kool-Aid to the point that we become HubSpot partners. I was incredibly impressed how they've evolved. And now they do have like some startup packages, and there's some pain points of, let's say, their pricing model, which they actually just changed because it can be price prohibitive for startups. I consider it the best scale up CRM there. And this is me having evaluated a lot of them and us doing custom CRM integrations for a bunch of clients. So if you're a scale up, I felt that was the best one. It has probably the best native integrations to your other tech stack, because let's say if you're like me and you have to do discovery and there's some work up front in that discovery to learn about your client that you have to assign to your team, right? Well, you have a PM tool. In our case, it's ClickUp. So we're using ClickUp as our project management tool that's client and internal projects. Direct integration with ClickUp that if I move something on my board, will automatically create a task and assign it to the right person from my HubSpot notes. That's a great example. Presentations, I think, as recent as I think 2 weeks ago, where an influencer had brought me up to a sale, and I use Canva myself, very handy. The moment he saw our title slide, he said, "Hold on, this looks really good. I'm going to go get my brother, who's my business partner." Just from the title slide, you could see the gear switch. So I think using Canva, uploading your brand in Canva makes it super fast to design really great presentations. So I'm using HubSpot once we get a lead. I mean, for generating inbound leads, if you're not leveraging content right now, and if you're not leveraging the ability to create content across multiple platforms or content syndication, you should be leveraging AI in one way or another. I think for your social content strategy, obviously I don't advise it for SEO. And then content syndication through, again, Canva, the ability to resize things super quickly for your social content strategy, and scheduling with Later is very easy. There's a direct integration between Later and Canva. So you're scheduling all your social content, which is really great. And then HubSpot for nurturing, again, super important. I think that again, if you're selling anything complicated that the user isn't aware of right away and they can't make that decision, you have to enable them in some form of nurturing with that content of a further. So for example, if I'm talking about a technical audit and there's a 200-point checklist that we do on their technical audit, nothing's the same. Have that automation and funnel within HubSpot of maybe that blog you wrote on technical audits, and have that automatically automatically go to them, right? That's a huge thing, to do that nurturing and that continuing education. And that will work, I don't know how many times better than another follow-up email. Educate them, continuing to create those educational processes. And then, yeah, I think when you're closing the deal, we used to use programs like Ignition for signing and servicing and QuickBooks integration. HubSpot does that now, takes our deposits. We use Stripe. All those little admin things have just made my life a lot easier, leveraging that.
Peter, thank you. Fantastic. Everyone check out nav43.com, more episodes of the podcast. And thank you. We'll see everyone next time. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.